Hello, everybody, and welcome to another adventure in history. And I hope that you are all doing well, and I hope that the massive heat wave that has been just destroying America and other parts of the northern hemisphere have avoided you as much as possible. But let me tell you, it's hot. And heard someone comment, just imagine this is the coolest summer that you'll have for probably the rest of your life. and I replied to that, don't count out nuclear winter. Because if we're going to do gallows humor, we may as well embrace the deepest and darkest of it, right? Starting off on a high note, hope you all are doing well, though. It's been a pretty interesting week around the residents here. I wrote a lot yesterday. I haven't written seriously for a long time, and I just sort of decided yesterday to make myself sit down and scratch the itch. And I wrote for almost 4 hours straight yesterday. It was pretty great. Got most of a short story out. Had a pretty good time doing that. We've basically been trying to stay inside because it has been sure enough hot down here. Heat indexes, or indices if you're just going to be particular, over 110, which is really, really up there. And very high humidity, not the best of outside weathers. What up? I woke up early Monday and Tuesday morning to do yard work stuff. And did that with the express purpose of trying to stay out of the heat. What's up, Tommy? And on Monday at 10 a.m., the heat index was already over 100. So it was rough. It was pretty bad. Yeah, it's not so bad. I had a pretty good day. I woke up and had some coffee, did some stream prep, and played some Hollow Knight, because Hollow Knight is a friggin' amazing game. I really enjoyed that. Had some lunch, did a couple of errands. That was the worst part of the day, having to be out among the population of people that were all deciding to drive in the heat. No, it wasn't that great. Then came home and hung out a little bit, did some reading, spent a little bit of time hanging out in Steve Sketch's chat. Me and Moose deserve each other? How so? What's up, Viber? It's pretty, I mean, it's summertime for me, so this is my designated try to recharge time. For my passionate love of Hollow Knight. It's good. I do like it a lot. I know that you had your differences with it, and I completely understand your differences, and they are legitimate differences, but I love it. It's immersive, and the music is great, and the story is catching me in ways that's making my head go, I really like the art too, so, you know. I hear Dead Cells is also good. I think I have that one. I bought a Humble Bundle of, I can't even remember how long ago, that I think might have had Dead Cells in it. But I'm not sure. I'd have to go pull up Steam and check all that stuff. But speaking of really hot weather, really high humidity, and lots of rain, Africa, which is the topic of tonight. And this is stuff that doesn't really get a lot of love. And I say that a lot here on stream. And I do sort of consider it my mission to give love to the areas of history that typically don't get a lot of love. And I will admit, because I admitted as much to the mod chat, what's up, Lumpy, earlier in the day, that it has been probably easier for me to look over some of these kingdoms in previous streams than it has been to try to make a stream out of them. And for at least two of the groups that we're going to talk about tonight, that is partially excusable. But for Aksum, which, still have the stream info from last time, which is inaccurate. Let me change that. Nope. Because this is episode 145. Had a long walk with a friend today. Oh yes, was today your walk around the city day? And I thought, if that was the case, I thought you had two friends that were going to walk with you today. And I hope that doesn't imply that something happened so that the other friend couldn't go. But anyway, I should have had a stream, at least on Aksum, earlier. And I told myself that I didn't need to because I was covering it in other streams. But I feel like I didn't give them the proper attention that they needed. So, to any fans of Aksumite history, I apologize. And to those of you that have no idea what I'm talking about, just know history nerd gonna history nerd, right? So, just the one. Well, I hope everything is well in that area. We don't have to go into it. You're welcome to shoot me a message on Discord or something and we can catch up with all of that stuff. So, let us begin with a discussion on a group of people that might be new to a lot of people.
I'm Spartacus!
Like Spartacus.
I'm Spartacus! I'm Spartacus!
I'm Spartacus.
I'm Spartacus! I'm Spartacus! Spartacus!
Green Herring, thank you so much for that subscription. Welcome back in. I lurked Doc's 4th of July.
You shall have camels, horses,
Oh my goodness.
provisions, desert vehicles,
And tanks.
You're welcome.
I was saying that I lurked Doc's metal detecting stream on 4th of July. And was going to say hello, but then I figured, I'll just do the lurking thing. But it's good to see you, and thank you so much for the subscription. And Lumpy, thank you for the cheer. Much appreciated, my friend. That is not good news, but I hope that it is the kind that is caught early and less intrusive. But again, not any of my business. We will hope for the most positive outcome there. But yes, thank you for the bits. Anyway.
You shall have camels,
And Matt,
horses,
welcome in.
escort, provisions, desert vehicles,
And tanks.
You're welcome.
Matt, thank you for the bits. Much appreciated, my friends. So I was just kind of feeling lurk. And I did, and I read a little bit while watching. So it was a good morning, a very slow morning after getting up early and doing yard work. So I came back in and I took a shower, and I was just like, ooh. So it needed to be a decompression moment. What's up, KP? All right, let's actually talk about these people now that I've almost mentioned them 5 times. So our first group is a kingdom referred or called Makuria. Now, this is a probable situation where we find ourselves that many of us might not have any idea who these people are, where they're located, why they fit, where they are or don't know anything about them, and that's okay, because again, this area of Africa, the sort of eastern coast and eastern central Africa, gets no love in Western history. If you're taking Western Civ at a college, or if you're taking World Civ at high school, there's a pretty good chance you are never going to hear about Makuria at all. And that stinks, because they're pretty cool people. What's up, Tuna? Good to see you. Now, first off, where are they? Because everybody wants to know, like, Africa's big. They are here. They are along the Nile. And they are starting somewhere up here, perhaps. And then we can see that down here, when we get closer to their neighbor, Alothia, it gets a little bit more questionable as to where exactly their borders are. And that's okay, and we'll talk about that in just a bit. But you can see that there are several large cities, including this one right here, Dongola. This is their capital. And this is a region that is in modern-day Egypt and Sudan. You all have heard me probably say multiple times that I would really love to go to Sudan. This is another one of the reasons I would really love to go, because there are really cool cultures that were there, and it's really unfortunate that the area is so frequently war-torn that it's hard to consider safe travel there. It's hard to teach that slaves had a better life as slaves than as savages in Africa if you also teach about African civilizations. That's true, Tuna. That's true. They have a big dam problem right there, right? Absolutely, and we'll mention that. In fact, one of the biggest drawbacks to conducting archaeological excavation for the people of Makuria is that a bunch of their cities are underwater because of the Aswan High Dam. Now, when that was first announced, UNESCO unleashed a whole bunch of funding, and there was a flurry of archaeological activity, and some of the buildings were able to be prevented from flooding, and some of them were excavated and then covered back up in the hopes that they would perhaps survive. I don't know. Some of the stuff, especially in the north, has been excavated, and the capital, Dongola, has been excavated, or Dongola, but the large majority of the cities of Makuria not greatly excavated. No, you can't. It's pretty tough. I say this probably with more I don't know, probably with more confidence than should be. But if you flew into the capital and just went north along the Nile to places like Meroe or Napata or Dongola or some of these other sites, you would probably be okay, because that area of all of Sudan is the most touristed. But Sudan is going through a crisis right now of multiple levels: government, water, ecological disaster, overpopulation, AIDS. There's just a lot of stuff going on in Sudan right now, and religious terrorism is part of it. So anyway, it's hard for me to think about how to get to Sudan safely, and that's unfortunate, because I'd love to go. So who were the people? We know where they are now. They're in the lower Nile Valley. But who were they? Mostly, they're going to be remnants of previous kingdoms, especially the Kushite kingdom that existed in the area for several hundred years, going back into the BC period. But they're also going to contain quite a bit of Nubians who had started migrating around during this period of time, so there's a bit of an overlap. You're also going to get some people that would have been part of the old kingdom of Meroe. We've talked about them several times on stream. Specifically, we had a viewer request stream on the queens of Meroe and some of the cool stuff that they had done. So there's a little bit of a mix, but culturally they're going to be fairly unified. They are going to have their own language, which is referred to today as Old Nubian. And because of some interesting connections that they had in the late 4th, 5th, and 6th centuries, they're going to convert to Christianity. So they're going to be part of the Coptic Christian rite. And the exact date of their conversion is a little bit in dispute. We have some textual sources from the Byzantines that give a certain date that doesn't necessarily seem to be completely accurate based on archaeological evidence that we have. But somewhere the late, basically the late 5th century or the early 6th century, they're going to convert somewhere around that time period. Perhaps even as late as the year 600 itself, though. It's a bit sketchy. So if you said somewhere between 450 and 600 they converted to Christianity, you'd probably be accurate. Now, what's really interesting about this is that they are almost immediately upon this conversion going to get faced with a big threat, and that is being cut off from the rest of the Christian world, right? So, again, Christianity is here based around the Mediterranean, but in the 600s we have the expansion of Islam coming out of the Arabian Peninsula, and we remember that they took Egypt and northern Africa from the Romans, and that's going to leave our kingdom of Makuria here, as well as the kingdom of Alodia, which is south of them. Christians cut off from the rest of the Christian world. And that's going to be a little bit hard for them, but they're going to make it work. And the Arab invasions are going to go up the Nile River. When we say up the Nile, remember that's a bit odd because it does flow from south to north. So upriver is actually going south, which I know. It's weird. It's just the way that it works, though. So the Arab invasions are going to make their way to Makuria, and Makuria is going to be able to fight them off. And there is apparently a string of battles, or perhaps one big decisive battle. It's a little bit fuzzy, somewhere between about 645 and 652. If you want my guess as to that, we could get into the specifics. I would say probably 650 or maybe 651. But we can nitpick and get into the weeds with that stuff that most people don't really care about. Middle 600s, there's going to be a clash between the kingdom of Makuria and the Arab expansion, and they're going to win. Now, what's going to happen, though, is a treaty gets worked out between them. And in exchange for their independence, the kingdom of Makuria is going to be expected to give a certain number of slaves every year to the caliph. And this is something that's going to continue for hundreds of years to come. Now, that might not sound like something that a good Christian kingdom would do, right? Why would Christians sell slaves to Muslims? But that's what happens, right? How few Google Street options of views? That's not necessarily a safe metric. There are legitimate concerns about some areas and whether or not Google should be allowed to street view stuff. So it's not, it doesn't hold across the board. They do have a lot of texts, specifically religious texts. So their language is Old Nubian, and I was getting around to this, and I sort of got sidetracked by my description of their conversion to Christianity. When they converted to Christianity, Greek, of course, then became a very important language for them. And Greek is going to be a language that many of them knew, but they're going to adapt the Greek alphabet. And they're going to use the Greek alphabet to write their own language. So they have Old Nubian as their spoken language, and they're going to add some symbols to the Greek dialect and used that script to write their own language. The Saginaw River, another major waterway, is like that, so you're used to it. Oh, cool. I think I knew that, but if you had asked me what was unique about that, I don't think I would have been able to pull that out of my head. Also, Brian, good to see you, my friend. Hope you're doing well. Because it's not originally an English word. That's why. But what's up with this slave thing? Well, there were plenty of kingdoms and groups of people around Makuria that were troublesome, especially semi-nomadic people that were coming out of the Sahara region and people that would raid sort of into their territory coming off the Red Sea. So a lot of these people would get captured as maybe not prisoners of war per se, but, prisoners that were causing a lot of trouble. And yeah, they would just sell them over to the caliphate as slaves. Christians didn't have a problem with the slave trade. It's crazy to see how much Greek letters move around. Absolutely. It really was a pretty important language of the ancient world. So what else were they doing? What was their thing? They did a lot of trade. They ended up trading north up the Nile. They're also going to trade east to the Red Sea and into the Indian Ocean. And that's going to be one of the themes of tonight. That this portion of Africa, especially this eastern portion of Africa, is going to be more closely associated with India and Southeast Asia in many ways than it is the Mediterranean. And a lot of people, when we talk about ancient Africa and you get even the nods to stuff like Nubia or Kush or these ancient kingdoms way back in, the BC era, they're always discussed in relationship to the Egyptians, who were ostensibly a Mediterranean power in many regards, right? But that sort of starts to change around this time period, and these countries over here are going to start looping into this really big Indian trade network. And we're going to wrap that up tonight at the very end, especially with these people down here on the Swahili coast. But trade out to the Red Sea is going to latch them into routes that go to India and even as far away as China, right? So these people are going to start seeing the money move around. And they have access to stuff like ivory and gold, which of course are going to be sought after by basically everyone, but also slaves. One of the biggest slave trades in the ancient world, or in the world history period, was the Indian Ocean slave trade. That was mostly facilitated by the various Muslim caliphates over the course of time. So, Red Sea, just got an ad for the Red Door. Ooh, what's up, Dave and Karen? How's it going? Hey, Cliff, howdy. It blows people's minds, but it's even in, yeah, I mean, it. Are you talking about the Christians being okay with slave thing, or the widespreadness of the Greek language thing, or the Indian Ocean trade thing? I've lost the context for it. I apologize, Maddie. Also, Maddie, good to see you. Hope you're doing well. So we're going to do a lot of trading on the home front. They're going to do quite a bit of farming, and specifically they're going to farm a lot of the same stuff that the Egyptians would, millet and barley. They're going to have a beer that's a kind of a staple for a lot of their stuff, but they're also going to have dates and make wine out of that, so like date palms and stuff like that. They're going to have a lot of irrigation, very similar to the Egyptians when it comes to creating more arable land by, shifting off some of these floodwaters. If it works in one spot, it'll probably work in another. So they do quite a bit of irrigation. It's going to expand their ability to grow food, but this is also going to facilitate an expansion of their population. If you can feed more people, you can have more babies, you can make bigger armies, you can take more land. It's all sort of a snowball predicated on feeding these people, right? So again, Tuna alluded to this, but they are very literate. They're going the Kingdom of Makuria is going to leave behind a lot of documentation. Now, one of the things to note, a lot of the stuff that they left behind is religious in nature. And for religious historians, and especially people interested in the Coptic rite of Christianity, these are going to be invaluable, because a lot of these are things like sermons or interpretations of scripture, or things like the right way to handle certain ceremonies and stuff like that. This is pretty fascinating stuff. Now, unfortunately for historian side of things, what that doesn't really always give us is a good narrative of what's going on. And especially for the earlier period of Makuria, we know the names of the rulers, but we don't necessarily know exactly what they did. And we don't really have a very firm timeline for when some of these people took the throne and gave up the throne, or died, or passed the throne down. We do know that they had a very stable dynasty, and that they took Christian names. That was very, very common. Almost all of the rulers of Makuria are going to have a good Christian name, like George or Stephen or Zechariah or stuff like that. Stuff that's out of the Bible, right? That East Africa India connection. Yeah. And this is one of the things that I really try to focus on a lot when I teach world history. The way that world history is broken up in at my college, you have World History 1, which is everything in history up to the year 1500, which is way too much to put in a class. And then 1500 to modern day, which is a lot, but, not nearly as much. So one of the things that I try to focus on, especially once we get to around the year 1000, is that the center of importance for global economy is not the Mediterranean, right? If we go back to the Bronze Age, the center for the global economy is right here, right? If you want to look at where the majority of the valuable goods are being traded, you can probably draw a circle right around here and get most of it. Now, that isn't to say that China and India don't have their own economies, but if you just look at sheer amount of goods being traded, this is where it's at. Now, that's the BC time period, but it shifts. And if you start looking at about the year 1000 to about the year 1500, this is where it's at. This is where the global economy is. The global economy is moving around the Indian Ocean following the monsoons. And this sea-based Silk Road trade here is probably going to touch 2/3 of the luxury items traded in the world. And by the time you get to the Mughal dynasty here in India, the Mughal dynasty alone at one point controlled almost 1/3 of the global economy. That's how massive they were. It's just crazy, right? This is why the Atlantic shift is actually such a big deal. When the Europeans find all of this, it's because the Europeans wanted to get into this. That's really the motivation. Now, everybody's like, Columbus wanted to go to Asia to trade spices. Yeah, he did. But what they leave out of that statement is European economies were basically floundering, and they weren't able to keep up with Asian economies. And they wanted to horn in on the money by cutting out the middlemen, who also happened to be mostly Muslim, and particularly the Ottomans, who were not friendly with most of the European powers. But I'm getting off track here, but that's usually what happens when we talk about history in my stream, which is a lot, right? What's up, Noger? Finishing some tandoori. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, exactly. So the shift to the Atlantic was sort of the second big economic shift of the world. From the Mediterranean to the Indian, and then from the Indian to the Atlantic. But boy, was Columbus a terrible navigator. Well, I mean, we can't give him too much guff. He didn't pay a lot of attention to the math that had already been done. People as far back as the BC era had calculated the circumference of the Earth, and while he tried to read some of that stuff, he really didn't give it a good enough go. Do you need to go see Brittany? You can go see Brittany. Or do you want to come up here? You want to see the puppy? Come here. Come here. Come on. Oh, yes. Here's the puppy. Oh, yes. Princess Puppy. Hello, Kaylee. Were you not getting enough attention? Oh, were you being ignored? Oh, we can't have that. Oh, my goodness. No, we cannot ignore the puppy. Oh, my goodness. Hello. Oh, yes. It's a good girl. Hello, puppy. Oh, so sweet. Yes, getting all of the attention. Yes, I'll look at the puppy. All right. That rotten thing. All she wanted was to be recognized. Have we shifted now to the Pacific? Brian, that's a great question, and I can't say no to it because I don't know how everything's going to play out. I will say that it's not shifted to the Pacific. But I don't know if that's necessarily going to be a permanent situation. Everybody thinks China is invincible. I don't. Columbus was kind of the flat earther of his day, but not flat earth, just thinking that 1,000 years of mathematician. Yeah, exactly. Right. There's a lot left to be played out on the economic stage with China. And there are a lot of unanswered questions that are still really, really important. The biggest one being, is China going to be able to automate its economy fast enough to outrun the fact that they have no next generation? And that's a real question. And a lot of people say yes they do, and a lot of people say no they don't. And I don't know if they're going to be able to do it. They have about 20 years to completely overhaul their economy in a way that makes it work with about half as many working people and with about 2.5 times as many retired people. And I don't know if they're going to be able to do that. That's a tough ask. And they're trying to export a lot of their economy to Africa and Southeast Asia. But I don't know if that's going to be the answers that they want either. I think they're going to have to resort to allowing immigrants, and they're really, really not going to like that. And that's not going to go over well at all. And there's already some evidence of migrant worker crises where people are basically working slave wages at Chinese companies. So anyway, so back to Africa. So what's going on with Makuria in the 10th? Well, they've sort of hit what we might call part of their golden age. This started in the 9th century, but it's definitely going to be in full swing by the 10th century. We start getting some big monumental buildings. We start seeing more art. Now, first off, give them a little bit of love. This is 1,100 years old, right? It's 1,100 years old, and it's still mostly there. So don't hate on the fact that this guy's gone. But this is a mural of one of their kings. This is King George II, or Georgios II. I wanted to include it just as an opportunity for you all to try to see a little bit of their artwork. I've got, I think, one more. Oh, well, I mean, we can go ahead and show this too. They're starting to build a lot. This particular building is at their capital city. which is today referred to as Old Dongola instead of Dongola. So the modern city of Dongola is just actually just south of the river of where this ancient older spot is. You can see that there are a lot of other buildings around. Now, if you see these little hive-shaped things out here, pay no attention to these. Those are Muslim tombs, mostly from the 1600s. But one of the cool things we can do, if we go over here to Google Earth full screen, we can actually go look at the ruins, because this is one of the places that has been pretty frequently targeted for excavation. And most of the excavation at the city has been conducted by a Polish team. But one of the things we can look at right away is just how big this site is, right? So we've got all sorts of buildings that are up here. You can see them scattered all the way out this way. But when you get down here to the south, right, this is the, just the sort of scope of how many buildings are here. And we zoom in a little bit and you start seeing all of these buildings that have yet to be completely excavated. You can see their walls and see where they built stuff. This is just a really, really neat site, and another place that I would really, really love to go wander around. You can see some of these are very well excavated, and others are still, kind of not. But really interesting site, right on the side of the river. Pretty cool things. You've seen bigger. Yeah, well, it's pretty cool stuff. I would love to go check it out. I do have another piece of their artwork here. This is a particularly interesting piece of a mural. This particular artwork is a mural that came from one of the cities that's now at least partially flooded because of the Aswan High Dam. This place called Faras. But what's interesting about these images is that these are the Magi. Yeah, I did pick these partially because this guy does look a little bit chunky. He looked a little bit chunky. He's not very chunky, but he's a little bit chunky. But these are the Magi. So these are supposed to be the the three wise men who brought gifts to Jesus upon his birth. And yeah, so this is, again, it's not completely Greek. It is mostly Greek, but there are occasional signs in here that are symbols rather, that are not Greek, and they don't use all of the Greek letters exactly the same way that Greek would. Some of them have a little bit more of a Coptic flavor to them because of the Coptic Christian Association. So pretty neat stuff for Aquarius. Now, if we're looking at just the political stuff that's going on, in the period of time where the Abbasids start losing some of their oomph, and we've talked about this a couple of times on stream previous, but the Abbasid Caliphate was sort of the big, powerful caliphate during the early part of the 10th century, and was definitely in power in the 9th and the 8th before. One of the things that is going to happen during that Abbasid dip is that Makuria is going to decide that they're going to be a little bit more independent, and they're going to stop sending this slave shipment every year. Gasthar is Casper. Elfin got you. Elfin Hour? Is it Elfin Hour or Elfin Ore? I'm not 100% certain. Or it could be 0 Hour too. Either way, welcome in. Good to see you. So Balthazar, Melchior, and Gaspar are the three wise men. And I've been to the... you remember them from Neon Genesis? Fair enough. They show up all over the place. They're also in Final Fantasy VI. Um, yeah. So it's Nubian is got a lot of influence from some of the big African linguistic groups. It's a little bit of a newer language as opposed to an older one, but like this would be like post of the big Bantu movements that spawned a lot of the big languages in Central Africa back, about 3,000 years ago or something like that. Elfinor. There we go. I got you. Pointy. I see ya. Welcome in. Good to see you. Hope you're having a good one. Please feel free to communicate and talk at whatever level you feel comfortable. We're all pretty cool and pretty chill here. So that's Makuria and a group of people that... Oh, I forgot to tell you. So they stopped sending the slaves. And the Caliphs sort of figured out, like, oh, wait, we're not getting our slaves from the Makurians. So the Makurians are actually going to take advantage of the fact that the Abbasids are sort of in a weakened position to renegotiate the deal. And instead of sending them the slaves every year, they renegotiate down to sending them a shipment of slaves every 3 years. So they're not without their own power base. And part of the issue is that they are so far away from the Abbasid central that the Abbasids had a lot of trouble projecting their power out that far. But it's also because the Abbasids were having so much trouble with breakaway stuff. Now, if you were with us in the last stream and you heard us talk about the Fatimids in Egypt, the Fatimids are going to brush borders right directly with Makuria. And what's interesting here is that it seems like they have a fairly friend of my friend kind of agreement where neither of them really like the Abbasids. And that's going to be enough to sort of bond them together. Now, it's not fair to say that the Fatimids and Makuria were ever best of friends, but they didn't go to war with each other all the time. There are some occasional boundary situations where, especially Makuria will raid north into Fatimid territory. That happens a couple of times, but for most of the time, Makuria and the Fatimids are going to get along fairly well because of the fact that they both hate the Abbasids. Now, this is not some giant blow to Abbasid power, right? They're not going to lose the game because they lose this nominal ally that's down in the Red Sea coast of Africa. But it is a blow that they really couldn't absorb because that gave the Fatimids one secure border to the south that they didn't have to worry about. If the Makurians had thrown in really strong with the Abbasids, that would have put the Fatimids in a situation where they were surrounded. So it's a tactical loss, even if it's not necessarily a one that's going to lose them the entire war, right? So, yeah, allies militarily, right? I found an enemy of my enemy is a very good reason not to, a very good reason to do stuff. It works as long as both sides are very honest with each other. Like, I'm not friendly with you, but I don't like this, and you also don't like this. And while we are not agreeing to be friendly when we're dealing one-on-one, when we're dealing with this other party, we can work in concert. And as long as the people doing the negotiating are honest and open about that, and as long as the people that take over the thrones behind that are honest and open about that, it can work. And it works all the time in history. I hate you, but I hate those guys more. And that's fair. And let's also remember that one of the things that ends up happening with the Fatimids, especially in the later part of the 10th century, is that they start causing a lot of trouble with the Byzantines. Because the Byzantines, of course, are Christians, and the Fatimids are going to use this idea that they're fighting against Christians as a big banner thing for them, right? Like, we are the ones taking the fights to the Christians, and those Abbasids are sort of sitting over there doing nothing. But they've got another Christian kingdom right on their border that was much more exposed than the Byzantines were, and that is Makuria. And they didn't try to say the same thing against Makuria when they could have. So there is some mutual benefit here. And this is, again, stuff that you're not really ever going to hear about in most of your history texts. Now, if we move a little bit further south, but up the river, we can talk about a kingdom called Alodia. This is not a story the Jedi would tell. This would be something that was in a Visions episode made by an African studio that did animation. And it would probably be one of the better ones, and it wouldn't count because it was in Visions and therefore not canon. And then I would go, oh, that would be cool if it was. Which is unfortunate how appropriate deep cut. Cheers. Right. Okay. Alodia. Where are they? Well, they are a little bit further up the Nile. So if we're looking at where we are, you can see here's Makuria and here's Alodia. Now, their capital is the city here of Soba, and you can notice that their territory has a lot more of these question marks. And there's a really good reason for that question mark. Is your time frame before or after? Ooh, sorry. Woo, wrong button. Sorry. I've been talking about getting a stream deck because I do stuff like that way too frequently. But if we're just being honest, I don't think it would actually keep me from doing that. Okay, so what's the question here? Guess who farted this guy? Great username. Welcome in. Hope you're having a good one. Is your time frame before or after they founded the Druze faith, which caused the start of the breakup internally? Okay, so for those of you all not familiar, the Druze particular concept of faith is generally referred to as an esoteric religion. And it's kind of like a mix of a lot of stuff when it comes to the various monotheistic cultures of the Mediterranean region. And this is mostly going to be in ancient Syria and Lebanon, here along the, where's my map? Here along the Mediterranean coastline. What we're talking about is a little bit before the foundation of the Druze stuff. Most of that happens in the very early part of the next century, the 11th century. Like in the first probably 20-25 years of the 11th century, you're going to start seeing the first foundations of the Druze religion, which is pretty interesting. The Druze are a great group that would be excellent for a viewer request stream. Now, what's interesting about the Druze specifically is that they are going to directly grow out of the stuff that's happening in this century. Guess who farted? I don't know if you were with us last week, but last week we were talking specifically about the big cultural shifts that happened inside of Islam during the 10th century. Most notably, big, powerful Sunni leaderships being switched out for big, powerful Shia leaderships. And the Ismaili group that was so successful with its missionary work around the Muslim world, both in northern Africa, Egypt, the Levantine region, Mesopotamia region, all the way over to places like Persia, Central Asia. The Ismailis are going to be one of the sort of predecessors of the Druze, but it is fair to note that the Druze are not Muslims. Neither are they Christians per se. It's a mix of a lot of interesting stuff. Pro streamer, absolutely, right. Get one. I couldn't live without mine now. You should call it the Drew's Scary Show. Ha ha. All the Drews carry the news. Yep. And I'm wondering if the facepalm thing is because of the bad puns. And this is a pun-friendly zone here. If you have a horrible pun, the only horrible pun is the one that you never share with your friends, right? Especially if it makes you giggle, or if you think it might make somebody else giggle, or groan. A good groan is a valid response to a pun. Anyway, Alodia. So, Alodia here, further south in Africa, but still in the Nile Basin. Specifically here, one of the things that's going to be a big difference between Makuria and Alodia is the amount of archaeological excavation. Alodia has had very little. There's been some stuff at the capital of Soba. There are parts of their world that overlap with other existing buildings. There's potentially some evidence that they took over some of the temples of Meroe and turned them into churches, but that's not necessarily going to happen all over the place. The correct way to appreciate a pun is a groan and a pained expression. That's fair, Frank. Good to see you, Frank. How are you? Hope you're having a good one. If we're talking about Alodia, who are they? Now, they are much more visually multi-ethnic than Makuria, most likely. I should say that while Makuria has lots of texts, including documentation that talks about themselves and pictures that talk about themselves, and we've done archaeological evidence to back a lot of that up, Alodia did not leave a whole lot of writing behind. They do have, writing, and a lot of their people are going to speak the old Nubian language that's spoken in Makuria. But they do have a lot of other languages present. They leave behind way fewer documents and way fewer inscriptions. So they're not really going to be as easy to pin down when it comes to their history. A few things that we can say with a certain level of security is that they are going to convert sometime between the 500s and the 600s. And this does seem to be because they asked for it. There's a document written by a Byzantine church historian, a guy named John of Ephesus, and he sort of gives us this narrative of one of the kings of Alodia sent to the church leadership and said, "Hey, we want a bishop to come down here to run our church, and we want to convert." And then it took decades for the church to decide to do it. And then sometime in the late 500s or early 600s, that seems to have happened. But then, of course, they're also cut off as well after the Arab expansion is going to block off the rest of the Christian kingdoms. They are going to share quite a bit, culturally speaking, with Makuria when it comes to just their day-to-day life. They are going to trade. They're going to be a lot more interested in trading eastward than they are northward, and their control of territory on the coast of the Red Sea is going to be really important for them, including a particular location of a city called Badi, which is probably an Alodian city. That's a really important port on the coast of the Red Sea where a lot of trade happened. Now, I would love to tell you that there are lots of other cool things that I could say about Alodia, but it's hard to. one of the things that I can tell you is that they were pretty gung-ho about Christianity, because you can see stuff like this all over the place. This is at a mine, and there are just tons and tons of monograms of the Archangel Michael on the wall here. If you all aren't caught up on your esoteric Christian symbology, this is the monogram of Saint Michael. So if you've ever seen this symbol, or if you ever see this symbol, this is the symbol of Saint Michael the Archangel. You know, lots of triangles because Illuminati. I'm just being sarcastic right now. But anyway, now that you know what this looks like, if you look here on the walls, you can see that they've carved this a bunch of times into the walls. I am confident few people are up on their ancient Christian monograms. Interesting question. KP, if I had asked you to draw St. Michael's monogram, could you have done it? I will be honest and say I couldn't have done it completely accurately. I would have done an approximation that did not include all of the pieces. Specifically, I would have forgotten this little piece and these crossbars. I would have drawn the hourglass on its side and the cross here. I would have forgotten these and this. I actually found a YouTube channel on exactly this topic recently, the Esoterica channel. That's a place where stuff like this would have probably been pretty common. A lot of people don't even realize those little Christian lamps are full of Christian. Oh, absolutely. Yeah. A lot of stuff that is used in churches now, that is used especially in like Eastern Orthodox stuff or Roman Catholic stuff, has a lot of symbolic meaning that just is lost on a lot of people. And that doesn't mean that it's not important for them. Oh, yeah, like the little Cairo thing that's on there. Yeah. Oh, that's super cool. Anyway, given that Twitch chat lives on emotes, we may be the most symbol-oriented communities in the world. I agree that there are a lot of emotes on Twitch. I would say that there are probably way more emojis on phones. We've created a new hieroglyphic language. And it is absolutely something that I talk about in sociology classes, because I talk about how ideas and symbols change over time. And I give a scenario where, you know, you go to the grocery store for your parent or for your grandparents. You go to the grocery store for your grandparents, right? And you ask your grandparents, what do you need from you're at the grocery store and you tell them, I'm in the produce section. What do you want me to get? And they send you an emoji of an eggplant and a peach. They're just thinking about eggplants and peaches. If you are a modern 20-something or teenager, that's not what you think your grandparents are sending you, right? Because symbols change over time. Moose 2271, what up? How's it going? It changes over time because GIF, right? People make meme references in real life conversations, pretty much. They just want to embarrass the youngins. There's a lot of people that don't get emoji speak. A lot of people. So, what's going on with Elodia in the 10th? Well, they're also kind of at their peak. The kingdom is going pretty well. Soba, their capital, is growing, and they're putting a lot of buildings in it. And unfortunately, there's not a lot of good stuff to look at, even from space at location. But I mean, you can look all this stuff up. Soba is just, it's spelled Soba. Like that. There does seem to be some fighting with Makuria along the northern border, and we know this because there are quite a few buildings that appear to be fortified positions along the northern border that are fairly close to the river that would have been there to hold position against an invading force. So it looks like Makuria's growth is going to be somewhat detrimental to Elodia, but they are going to begin expanding again eastward, especially towards the Red Sea. And this is going to bring them into contact with especially more Arabic people or Arabic-speaking people. And this is going to be a pretty big change in a lot of their culture, because it won't be too much longer before all of these places are going to end up in the hands of Muslim powers. So, again, I would love to spend more time talking about these people, but there's not a lot of archaeological work that's done in this area. What's up, Agni? How's it going, man? And even the archaeological stuff that has been done is fairly recent. It's like in the 1950s, which a lot of people are like, 1950s, that's forever ago. But archaeologically speaking, it really isn't. That's still fairly recent. So, there's that. Now, if we're moving a little bit further south, we run into our next group, which is the Kingdom of Aksum. And we can show a map of them. Now, we have mentioned the Kingdom of Aksum multiple times before on stream, specifically when we were talking about Christian expansion, we were talking about the Byzantines and Persians, when we were talking about client kingdoms of the Byzantine and Persians. And we talked a lot about how they played into the political world of client struggle and proxy war between the Byzantines and specifically the Sassanid Persians. They probably, well, I won't even say probably, they definitely deserved a standalone stream prior to this one, and I never gave it enough effort to make it work, and I should have. Aksum is really cool. They're the oldest of the kingdoms that we're going to be talking about today. They go all the way back to the 2nd century BC, if we're being fairly generous to them, and they're going to be pretty powerful, and they're effectively the antecessor of modern day Ethiopia. It's nice that the years before you were born are considered ancient history now. 1950s, not so old, right? Not so old, especially, again, archaeologically speaking. Now, if it was 1850, that's pretty old for archaeology. And we could even question whether or not they were doing actual archaeology or if they were just doing organized looting in the 1850s, right? They were decorating Lord so-and-so's house. Is that where the name Aksum came from in the Mummy? I think the name in the Mummy is Anaksu Ramun. Let me look that up. It's Anaxunamun. So, let me copy that. It's this. That's the name of the I don't know, the wife of the, I don't know. Was that the woman? I think that was the woman, right? The one covered in gold. Yeah. Yeah. And you couldn't touch her? Right, yeah. It's okay. It's the linguistic elements here are not completely separated. There's a lot of influence that went up the Nile, especially during the Bronze Age and then the Iron Age. So there are still some old Egyptian name elements that made it up the Nile, especially during the period of time where people that were up the Nile ruled Egypt, like the 26th dynasty. Is it 26th dynasty or 25th dynasty? Which ones was the Sayites? I think the Sayites were 27th, right? No, the Sayites were the 26th. So that means the Nubian dynasty had to be the 25th. Yeah, okay. 25th dynasty. Sorry. Because everybody's going to fact check me on the really oblique, deep third intermediate period anyway. Nerd. It's just a thing. Let it go. So, words and things. Okay. So, Aksum. Who were they? Again, they go back to the 2nd century BC, and they were a successor kingdom to the collapse of another kingdom called Demit, which had fallen apart in the early part of the 2nd century BC, and the kingdom of Aksum is going to take over the region and start expanding. And by the time we get to fairly early on, in the mid 300s, the kingdom of Aksum is going to convert to Christianity. They're one of the first big kingdoms to completely go over to Christianity. And this is stuff that we've mentioned before in the past, but I feel like it needed to be sort of packaged and put together. They are absolutely going to control trade coming out of the Red Sea. For quite some time, they're going to control both sides of the Red Sea right here. And they're going to control all of the trade that goes out this way. And they made a lot of money out of this. So they made a lot of money out of the trade, but they also physically created a lot of money. And their coins are going to look very reminiscent of a lot of the Byzantine coins that you may have seen here on stream, with a little bit of maybe some Persian flair in there, a little bit with the head stuff. But most of these are going to be pretty common when it comes to the ancient world, especially along the coastline. These Aksumite coins can be found in hordes all the way from the Middle East all the way over to places like India, and even sometimes I'm pretty sure there's been at least one location in China where some of these Aksumite coins have shown up. So they're trading in a lot of places, and their coins were good, right? They were pure, they were tradable, people were willing to take them. And that enough says quite a bit about the kingdom. You know, if you make crappy money and it's all devalued and debased, people aren't going to keep your coins. They're going to melt them down, and they're going to recast them into their own coinage, because nobody's going to want to take a coin that's supposed to be 100% pure gold and it's like 60% pure gold, right? It's just not worth keeping those crappy coins around. So they are going to be speakers of multiple languages. They do have a local language, but they are going to have Greek as sort of the language of trade and government. And a lot of the documents that come out of Aksum are going to be written in good old-fashioned Greek. They are, around the 4th century, going to develop their own script, though. And they're going to write their documents in their own alphabet from that point forward. It's still going to be either the local language or Greek, but it's going to be using their own alphabet. So a little bit of a different situation, opposite situation between them and Makuria, who took the Greek alphabet and wrote their language in it. Now we have them using the Greek language but writing it in their own alphabet in Aksum. So they're going to hit their height around the 5th or the 6th century. This is around the same time that we talked about them in connection with the Romans and the Persians. They're going to be a target of attack. Muhammad is going to send groups after them during the expansion period of Arabia. What began the convention of profiles on coins? Did it just look stupid? Did the face just look stupid? It is easier to do stuff in profile because it doesn't require you to do proportions, right? Your eyes don't have to be the same size because you're only doing one eye. Your nostrils don't have to be in proportion. It requires less fine detail, which means that it's going to stand up in better relief. It's just a matter of practicality. You see a few coins that are in the full front, but most of them are profile, but just out of simplicity's sake. Gold is a fairly soft metal, and the more detail that you put in it, the faster it's going to rub away or mush. So you wanted it to be identifiably you for as long as possible, so that everybody knew that you were the one issuing the coinage. So that's a fair question, though. It wasn't just because people had a good side and a bad side, and they always wanted to make sure to get the good side. I've got a little bit of a larger nostril over here, so could you just get like this side? If we look at Aksum in the 10th, they're actually going to be at a bit of a low point, which is, I guess, different than the previous two kingdoms. There were an increasing number of invasions in their borders, especially from the south. Now, what's interesting here is that we don't have good, reliable sources as to who these people were. Some people in the ancient world say that the invaders from the south that were coming from, these regions over here, or even here on the Horn of Africa into Aksum, were pagans. So before King Azana was the kingdom polytheistic, Judaic, or a mix of everything. So King Azana was the guy who is responsible for converting everybody over to Christianity. He was king I don't think we know when he actually started reigning, probably around the 320s. I think that he was probably done by the 360s, maybe 360. But before that, there were a mix of local polytheistic religions. There is a tradition that there were Jewish people in this area, but it's also quite possible that those traditions of Jewish heritage were later inventions by Christians in the kingdom as a way to justify them being involved. One of the locations that's in Aksum that I'll show you here in just a second. Well, I mean, we can go ahead and look at it. It's a place called Dungur. It was their capital during this period of time. The palace at Dungur is referred to as Queen Sheba's palace. And of course, if you know your Bible, the Queen of Sheba was famously in a relationship with King Solomon during the biblical time period, and was the source of lots of his wealth coming from Central Africa. Now, is Dungur Palace that we're looking at here, which is a really, really big building, pretty epic size, and there are a couple of pictures we can kind of pop in the middle and look around the building. There's some evidence that there was a kingdom here, right, sure, but are the people that were in Aksum completely Jewish, that had converted under Solomon and had maintained that Jewish identity all the way through the ages to come up to the point of being in control during the 300s and then converting to Christianity? I don't know if we can say that for certain. It's an interesting thing that they would definitely like to say, but one of the things about Aksumite history is that a lot of it is not written down. It's expected to be memorized and translated orally and transmitted orally. Was the building used for ritualistic purposes? So that was a palace, and it was the home of a ruler, and designated as Queen Sheba's palace is a very modern designation. The building itself is obviously not Iron Age old. It's pretty clearly built around this time. The kingdom used to be at the city of Aksum, but they moved it to Dongur because it's a little bit further east, and trade was picking up over here, so the capital needed to be closer to where the centers of trade were going on than Aksum was. So they're still going to be referred to themselves as Aksumites in documentation and things like that, but their actual capital is going to be at Dongur. Or Dungur, sorry. Guess who farted? That's a question that's tough to answer in a way that recognizes that oral history can absolutely contain truth and transmit truth just as effectively as written history. But it's also something that we have to give a really clear nod to, that it benefits their identity to have an entire kingdom of Jewish people that goes all the way back to the Iron Age, right? And I don't think that we can do that. I'm pretty sure that we're going to find evidence of polytheistic activity in the area, because even during this time period that we're talking about right now, there is a point in this period around the middle part of the 900s where there's one of these invasions happen, and it's attributed to a lady named Gudit, which is apparently a transliterated version of the Jewish name Judith. So there's your Jewish heritage, but she is credited with destroying Christian churches and buildings and bringing back polytheistic religion. So here we have just a weird confluence of events where, are there polytheistic people that have Jewish heritage? Maybe so, because, Judith or Gudit is not a traditional Aksumite name that would have been there prior to the biblical narrative stuff being involved, but she's also destroying Christianity and reinstating polytheism. So it's an interesting mix of peoples, and unfortunately I don't know if we'll ever be able to completely disentangle all of that stuff. What do you mean that the people focus on the parts of their history that benefit them and hide the other parts? I've never heard of that before. Weren't you literally talking about how we don't talk about Africa in American history just earlier this stream? I see you, Tuna. I see you. So Aksum gets kind of wrecked at the middle part of the 10th century, and it's only at the very, very end of the 10th century that we get a revival under a new dynasty, the Zagwe dynasty, and we can look at the amount of territory that they managed to hold on to, which is not a lot, right? If we go back just a couple, they had a big old kingdom and territory way down the coastline, but then things got real bad, and this is pretty much all that they managed to hold on to after things went south for them. But you see big old Alodia up here just doing its thing in the power vacuum period. But anyway, the Zagwe dynasty is going to hold on for a couple hundred years, and then that's going to give way to the actual modern dynasty that rolls all the way up to people like Haile Selassie. So if you've ever heard of Haile Selassie, a very popular Ethiopian ruler who, if you know anything about Caribbean religions, and if you know anything about Rastafarianism, they believe Haile Selassie to be a reincarnation of Jah. So this kind of all ties into that, just across centuries of time, right? So that's Aksum. Pretty cool, interesting group of people. Should have done a stream on them earlier, and that's my bad for not doing so. All right, let's move a little bit further south and zoom out a little bit, and let us talk about this region right around in here. And this is the Swahili coast. And if you want me to highlight it, we can see here, we're mostly talking about this region that extends from the modern day country of Kenya through Tanzania down into what is modern day Mozambique. Interesting area that I would, if you all play Worldle yesterday was Mexico, 2 days ago was Tanzania. And I was convinced that Dar es Salaam was the capital, and I was wrong. I also can't ever guess the flag, and I'm really bad at guessing population as well. Anyway, the Swahili coast. Now, who were these people? These people are going to be local inhabitants from Africa that have always lived there, but they are going to be really heavily influenced by the Bantu migrations. If you are not so familiar with the Bantu migrations, I suggest checking out the Sub-Saharan African peoples viewer request stream that we did. We talked about the Bantu people for quite a bit on that. But generally speaking, group of people that were starting right around in here that influenced pretty much everything in South and East Africa, linguistically and culturally for quite some time, during this big migration out of their traditional homeland. So they were polytheistic. By the time we get to the 10th century, it does look like there are some Islamic converts, but we're also not sure. It could just have likely been people that were Muslim that settled in the area and married into local Swahili populations, as it was as it was Swahili people converting to Islam. If we go 100 years in the future, there are going to be Muslim people all over this area. This is a period of time where it's starting to have a lot of influence, specifically with the money that's coming in, because this period of time is going to show pretty rapid expansion. So what are they doing just to get by on a day-to-day basis? They are going to do some farming, but they are going to experience rainy seasons and dry seasons that do make a lot of agricultural efforts pretty tough to manage. They do try to mitigate some of that with stuff like pastoralism. There's a lot of goats and some sheep, but mostly goats in this area. And, of course, because they're on the coast, they're going to have the additive properties of fishing. So they're going to have a pretty well-rounded diet. They're going to be not lacking for food. But they are going to be heavily involved in trade. And this is where the centralization power is going to come in. When there's a lot of money, people are going to want to be in charge of that money. And they're going to get lumped into this larger Indian Ocean trade route thing that we've been talking about all night long pretty early on, because they are a natural target for trade. Now, what am I talking about when I say that? Well, if we look at this. Now, if you're not super familiar with Indian Ocean water currents and wind currents, there is a system called the monsoon that basically works like a revolving conduit of air pressure that moves sort of broadly in this western portion of the Indian Ocean. And you can see here that from November to February, the monsoon winds are going to be blowing south in this direction, and then from April to September, they're going to be blowing back north. So you have this cyclical pattern. And if you are going to set out on a ship from over here in India, you can ride these winds down the coast. And this is going to put you right in a lot of our cities. Now, Mogadishu, of course, is going to be a big one. Mogadishu is in modern-day Somalia. It's the capital of modern-day Somalia. That was an earlier city that had already been quite a bit established, and there were already Somali influences happening in this sort of transitory region right here. But the big cities that are going to come out of the Swahili coast are these three right here: Mombasa, Zanzibar, and especially this one, Kilwa. These three cities right here are going to be superpowers, and Kilwa is eventually going to be just super duper power. They're going to basically conquer the whole eastern coast over here under well, I'm getting ahead of myself, but anyway. So these cities are perfectly situated because the trade routes are going to bring you by this way anyway. You're going to load up on stuff, and then you're going to ride those monsoon winds right back up to India. This is a mechanism that is straight up set up for trade. And you can see all of these black lines, which represent trade routes. We've already talked about all this stuff, connecting all the way over here as far away as China. When we've been talking about Southeast Asia, you can again see how wrapped up Southeast Asia was in this trade stuff. This is the economy center of the world during this period of time. This is where the vast majority of wealth is changing hands, and Africa is absolutely essential to it because this is the final destination for a lot of stuff that starts all the way over here, right? So you're going to set out of China and you're going to trade, and that stuff's going to get moved over here, and it's finally going to get moved to Africa in exchange for African goods, which are going to get moved back up to India and then around over here to China. This is the Silk Road on the water, right? You've heard about the Silk Road before. This is the floating Silk Road, and these Swahili cities are absolutely going to be a part of that. Now, these cities are going to establish themselves first off just as a city, right? You're going to have a group of people that are going to meet in a nice port. They're going to be people that are going to trade, but this is going to draw attention. This is going to draw population, and this is going to draw power, because with money, next thing that comes up is power. And it doesn't take very long for the 900s to turn some of these trading cities along the coastline into city-states, where each of them is going to have a king that is going to preside over all trade deals in the region, and they're going to be trading all of the stuff that everybody wants: gold, ivory, spices, and slaves. These are sort of the four pillars of the Indian trade route sort of stuff. Now, originally these people are going to speak Bantu languages, but with the admixture of Arabic people and Persian people and Indian people and Chinese people, there are going to be a lot of changes that start happening in the languages of these cities on the Swahili coast. And it's going to start influencing not only their language, but their culture. Of course, culture and language are very closely related. Their style of dress, their religious stuff, again, is going to change pretty rapidly. They're going to convert to Islam very, very fast. When we pick back up with them, the next time we come back around, they will be almost completely Islamified. That doesn't sound right. Islamized doesn't sound right either. They're going to be converted to the Muslim faith. So the Swahili coast is sort of getting its gears going around this time period and converted. Yeah, they're just going to be converted. But they're going to be a big player in the game. So this is like player 2 entering the game. Swahili coast. Lots of cool history to go to. Almost the entire ancient city of Kilwa is on an island, and the entire island is a UNESCO World Heritage Site. I would love to go there. It'd be absolutely fascinating to visit. Super duper old mosques, some really cool frescoes, just all kinds of cool stuff. But that is all that I had planned to talk about. So we talked about 4 African regions tonight. I hope that these were interesting. I know, again, that this is not stuff that necessarily comes on the bus tour. This is not really stuff that you get when you go to your history class. And I always feel like it's my duty to talk about this kind of stuff, because otherwise, when is anybody going to talk about this kind of stuff? You know, I don't think a lot of people are going to, just jump off the board to talk about Alodia, right? But I find them fascinating. I haven't met a period of history where I don't love something about it, right? All right, so that's all that I had planned. But of course, as always, that doesn't mean that I have to run away. So if anybody has questions about any of this stuff or wants to redeem any channel points, now's a good time to do that. Dun, 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 dun. Brayan 12, Texas. Thanks so much for that follow. I don't know if that's actually Texas. I'm just assuming that's Texas because, don't mess with Texas. You're welcome to correct me. But thank you so much for that follow. Welcome to the adventure. Hope that you're having a good night. Even the Smithsonian museums are light on this history. Yeah. And the kind of sarcastic remark that I gave was, oh, you can see a lot of this history. You just have to go to Lisbon and London and Paris and Berlin. The Swahili Coast is an independent powerhouse of a nation until the Portuguese show up. And then it takes about 100 years for this region to basically be wrecked and turned into a Portuguese colony. It's also fair to point out that by the time that the scramble for Africa is over in the mid-late 800s, there are only 2 countries in all of Africa that were not colonized by the Europeans. Liberia is one of them because America says to the Europeans, don't screw with Liberia. And Ethiopia, who fought multiple wars to retain their independence and beat the Italians many times and made the Italians look very silly. Blah, blah. You heard more about African cultures at the Natural History Museum than at the African museums I saw. Well, part of that is because America has not been actively involved with a lot of stuff in Africa, historically speaking. So we haven't been there to get access to a lot of their items, right? If you go to the Asian stuff, America's been much more active in Asia, right? We owned the Philippines for quite some time. We got involved in Japanese and Chinese trade. We were directly interested in what was going on in places like Vietnam, right? Because we had a big war there. And we had a lot more interest in Asia than we did Africa. If you go to places like probably the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York, or maybe the Getty, or maybe some of the museums in Chicago, you might be able to see a little bit more of this, but you're not going to find a lot of these artifacts in America. Mostly because, again, we just didn't have a lot of contact with that part of the world. America's never had particularly strong ties with Eastern Asian countries, or Eastern African countries. It's just never really been sort of a prerogative for us. And I would point out, somebody brought up China earlier. One of the reasons why China has been so successful in Africa is because of the fact that America has, for all intents and purposes, ignored large portions of Africa for decades or even centuries at this point, right? Yeah, we have spent a lot of our history being isolationist. That's fair as well. All right, so Noger says, what's in the news? And I get to pick. There are a few things that I could talk about, and I'm not sure which one I want to talk about. Well, we could talk about Sudan. Sure. There are increasingly frequent attacks against especially young people in Sudan. People getting kidnapped, schools getting targeted. The political situation in Sudan proper is deteriorating really, really rapidly. There is technically supposed to be a ceasefire that's in effect right now, but neither side of the conflict is really paying attention to that. For those of you that have no idea what's going on, I guess I should start kind of at the beginning. Let's throw on the modern borders. The modern day country of Sudan is here. This big guy right here, the capital city is Khartoum. And there was a coup several years ago that pushed out the kind of the last big, really horrible military dictator that had been propped up from the Cold War. When that guy got pushed out, there was supposed to be a fair, democratically elected position created for president. That theoretically worked, and then it didn't. The military coup rose up against that. Elected leader, that person got kicked out of power. The military put the entire country under martial law. Part of the military decided that they actually did want to work with the international community and restore a democratic process, and the other half of the military said, no, we should just run the country. And there has been significant fighting for about the last 4 or 5 months in Sudan over whether or not the country is going to return to a democratic basis. There has been a decreasing amount of international attention paid to this because of all of the other stuff going on, but that solution has not been reached yet. There are still people, especially in the capital city of Khartoum and in some of the several other large cities, there are people protesting and getting killed all the time in Sudan right now. It's pretty rough stuff. Where in the world is Yevgeny Prigozhin? Apparently St. Petersburg, but who knows? Do it up, I do up. Yep. All right. Look up Defunct TV episode of the show on YouTube. Has fascinating history. Okay. So we could talk about Sudan. That'll work, yeah. There's also crazy stuff going on in France. There's crazy stuff going on in Senegal. There's crazy stuff going on all over the world, right? Prigozhin's avoiding windows. Yeah. Well, if he was dead, they would parade his body. Until I see his body being dragged behind a car or something like that, I'm not going to believe that he's dead. They will parade his body when he's dead. There will be pictures of his dead body on the news. And I know that sounds graphic, but that's how Putin's going to play this one. If and when they kill Prigozhin, they are not going to do it quietly. Because they're just not. They're just not going to do it quiet. All right. So I think it's time to go and do ourselves a raid. And we're going to go raid one of my favorite streamers, who I don't get to raid very often because he usually streams at odd times and is not on while I'm on. But we're going to go raid Aristotle, who is a philosophy professor in real life and is just a generally interesting guy who gets into all kinds of crazy stuff on stream. So that's where we're going to go. Or he's frequently in the chat here on the stream. Glad that your root canal allowed you to... Oh, tuna. That's a horrible exchange. I hope the root canal went well, but that's a horrible thing, man. Horrible thing. Anyway, we will have a viewer request stream on Tuesday next week. So come by and see that. And then come back by Thursday next week for our regularly scheduled Adventure in History. We will be doing the Byzantine history in the 10th century. So I know that there are people that are super excited about that. So come back around and we'll see you then. But until then, when we get to Eris's stream, yell adventure, throw emotes in the chat, and I will see everybody on the flip-flop. Take it easy.